Hi all. So today will be this will be the last lecture of our online ethics course. For today I had you read chapter 13 of our textbook, Elements of Moral Philosophy. And the chapter is titled, What Would a Satisfactory Moral Theory Be Like? So in this chapter, our author, James Rachels and Stuart Rachels, they try to pull together some of the insights we've had over the course of this class and come up with, see what sort of the take-home lesson is about ethics and about an acceptable moral theory. So we'll see what we can pull together since we've talked about a lot in this class and discussed some arguments on both sides of some issues, but we'll see what a proposal for a satisfactory moral theory might be like. So before I get to that, in the class conversation, the discussion board, I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and it will be very easy for you to win the points. So I'm going to ask you what your favorite topic is that we've covered from this list, and then I'm going to ask you, did you change your mind on any topic based on the arguments we covered in this class? If so, which ones, and why? And if not, why not? So why did you change your mind, or why didn't you change your mind? And even if it wasn't a complete flip based on an argument, I'll be interested to hear if any of the arguments like move the needle on any of these issues for you. So I'll look forward to hearing what you have to say about that. But now let's jump into the chapter, and we'll try to be pretty brief with this lecture. So the first thing Rachel talks about is that we need to any acceptable moral theory will offer us a morality without hubris, so without cockiness or being overly proud. So Rachel says, although we've read many interesting moral theories and stressed the role that reason can and should play in ethics, we've seen how theories can conflict with each other and how limited a role reason can actually play in our moral judgments. And these facts should be humbling. So we shouldn't think when it comes to moral discourse that our side is the one with all the facts and all the reasoning, and the other side is just wild speculation and reasoning based on feelings. We should be humble when we're approaching ethical issues, recognize that our own ethical judgments might be significantly based on feelings, and we might have inconsistencies in our own moral views that we need to work out. So along with being humble, an acceptable moral theory will offer us a modest conception of human beings. So we are part of the natural world and just one species among many. Humans used to think that we existed at the center of the universe and we were the only value givers in the universe, and that anything that had value came from human beings, and that we were created in God's image, and so the universe revolved completely around us. We've come to realize that much of that conception is wrong, that we aren't at the center of the universe, that we're just one among many types of animals. We have common ancestors, so and humans won't be around forever, so we shouldn't think of ourselves as being the only things that matter, right? And finally, on this topic, how reason gives rise to ethics. So we should do what there are the best reasons to do, and we should make an effort to be consistent. We should recognize that many of our moral judgments are based in sort of gut reactions, but we should try to compare our feelings on cases with nearby cases, see if there are any ethical principles to draw from these cases, and make an effort to be consistent. Because if we're not consistent, somebody might reasonably ask us, well, why should I believe what you believe on this topic, right? All right, so another aspect of any acceptable moral theory will be treating people as they deserve. So Rachel's himself a utilitarian, unsurprisingly will offer up utilitarianism as a theory, or a slightly modified utilitarianism as a theory that's acceptable. But interestingly, he'll one of the modifications he'll make is treating people as they deserve, or at least a point of emphasis with his utilitarianism will be treating people as they deserve, which is interesting because if you think back to when we talked about utilitarianism, we saw that utilitarianism and justice can often diverge. So Rachel says we should promote the interests of everyone alike, so that is a standard utilitarian line. Sometimes, however, people deserve to be treated differently because of the choices they make. Those who treat others well deserve to be treated well. Those who treat others poorly deserve to be treated poorly, he admits. Now, if we're thinking about utilitarianism, utilitarianism can accommodate these intuitions by recognizing that if we treat people well who have treated others really poorly, then we sort of chafe against that. So that might upset a lot of people. So utilitarianism can get some concept of desert back into the fold. So as Rachel says, any acceptable moral theory will treat people as they deserve. One of the problems we saw with utilitarianism, or one of the potential problems, was maybe it diverged too much from our concept of desert. And he's going to try to get that back into the fold with utilitarianism. So also a variety of motives are acceptable. So people should very often be motivated by promoting the interests of everyone alike. But here Rachels makes a point, he echoes John Stuart Mill's conversation on this. There are other praiseworthy motives. So recall, a utilitarian doesn't care what motivates an action. The action will just be judged in terms of whether or not it promotes the interests of everyone alike and how much it does. But there might be many routes which might lead there, and utilitarians don't care what motive leads there as long as we get to the most good overall. So love of and loyalty to friends and family, taking pride in one's job and projects, these are praiseworthy motives, and when we act on these motives, we are more likely to promote the interests of everyone alike, to get to a world that actually contains the most happiness. If we tried to create a moral system that denigrated these motives, then that would probably be a less happy world. So it would be one which utilitarians, interestingly, would not accept. So if we act on these motives like love and taking pride in one's job, then we'll probably get a better world in the end, and that's something that utilitarians would want. Rachel says only a philosophical fool would say that these are not praiseworthy motives. There, I think he has Kant squarely in his crosshairs. So the strategy that Rachels ends up promoting and offering to us as an acceptable moral theory, he calls multiple strategies utilitarianism. So although Rachels claims some people deserve to be treated differently because of their choices, and people should sometimes be motivated by other concerns besides promoting the interests of everyone alike, he still offers a general utilitarian framework as an example of an acceptable moral theory. So he says there's one moral standard, and that's human welfare. Later, he'll actually say sentient welfare, so the well-being of all creatures that can feel happiness. That will be the moral standard. So that will be the standard by which our actions will be judged. But our lives would be worse if we didn't recognize and promote justice, love, and other motives. So this is echoing what we said about the last slide. So Rachels proposes, given that Rachels has proposed reason as something we should consult when we're thinking about the right thing to do, and that a utilitarian framework is a good one to adopt as long as we recognize certain nuances in it. Rachels will propose that right action is living according to the best plan. So each of us, he proposes, should consider what the best plan for our lives will be. And that plan may differ person to person, but it will share many similarities. Each person's list will have many similarities. So we should consider the optimum list of virtues, motives, and methods that each of us will adopt. So we need to consider the virtues which are needed for one's life to go well, the motives on which we would like to act, the commitments that we might have to friends, family, and others, the social roles that we occupy and the responsibilities which come from those social roles, the duties and concerns associated with the projects we undertake, the everyday rules that we would like to follow without even thinking about them, and a strategy for considering when exceptions should be made. Now, if that sounds like a lot of work, it sounds like a lot of work to me if you were actually to sit down and write out these commitments. I haven't even done that in years of teaching this class, but I do think about whether or not I'm being consistent. I do think about the various roles I play and whether I'm contributing to the common good and living up to my commitments to family members and performing my job adequately and things like that. So maybe answering these questions or writing down your own lists is too much to expect, but at least he says we should be considering these things. So my best plan, he says, is the plan that will optimize the chances of my having a good life and the chances of other people having good lives too. Now, these can sometimes come apart. In this last chapter, Rachel's is being very conciliatory, that trying to come up with a theory that most people would accept. And it could be that I need to rein in my own self-interest for the chance of everybody had the best possible world, but consider both, here he says. So any moral theory, he says, will spend a lot of time thinking about the moral community. So the moral community, he says, is not limited by distance, class, or nationality. It's not limited by time either. So we have moral duties and obligations to future generations, not just people living now. And he says it's not limited by species membership. We all already recognize this to some extent. We think we shouldn't treat people's pets, abuse people's pets, or abuse wild animals if it's not necessary. But we, as we saw when we talked about our obligations to non-human animals, our common sense is very inconsistent on this issue, and we should make an effort to judge and act on consistent principles, especially in this area where it seems we have a huge moral blind spot, where common sense diverges wildly from what many ethical theorists agree with. In fact, I think over 80%, that things like practices like factory farming are completely morally unacceptable. So we need to think of broadening the moral community, and any acceptable moral theory would propose a broader moral theory than humans have traditionally held, or that common sense even holds. All right, so he ends with justice and fairness. Interestingly, Rachel supports a Kantian conception of the justification of punishment over the traditional utilitarian justification. So people deserve sometimes deprivation just because they've done something wrong, not because it will lead to the most happiness overall. I don't know whether this squares with his utilitarian theory, but in his defense, a utilitarian can note that if we don't treat people how they deserve, then that will upset many people if they hear about it. So utilitarianism can often be in line with our conception of justice. The last thing he ends with is only a person's voluntary actions can justify a departure from the policy of equal treatment. So in a very controversial turn in the second to last paragraph, he says people should only be rewarded and punished for things over which they have control. And then he talks about gifts of fortune that people don't have control over, but which our society tends to reward. So things like being good looking, being intelligent, being born into a wealthy family, all of these things people don't have any control over. They're the gifts of fortune, or if you're on the opposite side of the coin on those issues, the things which you're deprived of. But society tends to reward people for things that they're not in control over, and that doesn't seem just. In a just society, people would tend to be rewarded for things they have control over and not be rewarded or punished for things that they don't have control over. It's interesting to think about things like inheritance, like people passing down money. How much should be allowed in regard to this? But all of this is a bit too controversial, super interesting, but a bit too controversial to talk about in our last session here, where we're trying to talk about take-home points that we can all agree on. So we'll skip a bit over that and go directly to the conclusion, and I'll read his conclusion, and we will have a couple quiz questions, and that will be it for our class. So he says, what would a satisfactory moral theory look like? I've outlined the possibility that seems most plausible to me. According to multiple strategies utilitarianism, we should maximize the interests of all sentient beings by living according to our best plan. Modesty, however, is required when making such a proposal. Over the centuries, philosophers have articulated and defended a wide variety of moral theories, and history has always found flaws in their theories. Still, there is hope. If not for my suggestion, then for some other proposal down the road. Civilization is only a few thousand years old. If we do not destroy it, then the study of ethics has a bright future. So a cautionary note, but one which is hopeful. With all the progress that has been made in ethical theories, and I think there has been some progress made, some agreement that has been come to on some of these issues, we can be hopeful that there'll be more in the future. All right, so now just a couple quiz questions. Quiz question 1 is just a true-false question. Since we so rarely use our reasoning to come to our moral judgments, Rachel's advocates abandoning reasoning when it comes to morality. Is that statement true or false? And number 2, Rachel's proposes that any acceptable moral theory will recognize that the moral community includes A, just rational adults, B, humans and non-human animals, or C, only those who can benefit or harm us. According to Rachel's, any acceptable moral theory will think which of these of the moral community. All right, so that's it for our class. As far as that's it for me, I'll still be hearing from you if you decide to turn a paper in, and on the discussion board, and also you still have the last exam to do. So I'll be sending an email around about all that, but thanks for tuning in to these lectures. I hope you got something out of the class. And that's it for me. So hopefully I'll see you around campus sometime or in future classes. If not, good luck.